So, definitely welcome back. Thank you everybody for showing up. 1 second. Let me adjust this. There we go. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you guys for showing up. Harriet, welcome back as well.
Thank you.
It was your birthday this past week.
It
Um,
was.
so how did you enjoy the celebration and all the birthday wishes?
My birthday was my birthday was wonderful from start to finish. I turned 39 on Saturday. My husband started celebrations on Thursday. It culminated at the. I went to the game Saturday. I love basketball. So the Hornets played the Grizzlies. John Moran is a hometown boy here from Sumter. So I got a suite at the game with a few of my closest friends. Terrell was able to come through. He stopped working to roll through. Even though he and Jeffrey sat back there, I know y'all was having a business meeting because I saw 5 cell phones and calendars. But no, my birthday was phenomenal. So yeah, thank you for coming out to show love. But it's been amazing. I'm looking forward to my 39th year.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I guess as you kind of roll into, year number 39,
Mhm.
any immediate goals you have for this year or
Every year, I say every year that the Lord allows me to live, my life gets better and better. So I just want to continue to develop into the person that the Lord has created me to be, called me to be. There are new opportunities, new experiences. And so, yeah, man, life is good, but I'm not going to put a cap on it because God has been doing this Ephesians 3:20 thing with me, exceedingly more above what I could have thought or imagined. So I'm just keep rolling with God and basking in his favor. That's it. That's where we at.
awesome. I love it. I love it. Well, definitely again, happy belated birthday.
Thank you, friend.
And also I think, I will say is thank you everybody who's tuning in. Because we've been continually getting messages and responses from people that have been excited about, the show and the different topics that we were talking about. So thank you everybody for tuning in every week. And thank you for sending in some of the questions. So last week we had a question that came in, which I'm not sure if we're going to get to that question today, but we will definitely continue working in some of the questions that you guys have. So also today is Valentine's Day. So happy Valentine's Day to everybody that's tuning in. Hopefully you guys you enjoyed your weekend, you're enjoying your Valentine's Day. If you got something special, definitely enjoy it and have fun. With your birthday this past weekend, any plans for today as well?
So Jeffrey, we're doing. I think we have an event tonight at our downtown something location, a day of love or something. So we've had several couples RSVP for the fine dining experience the Lampkin Way. So he'll be doing that. I will swing by there when I leave my office, grab my food to go, and go home and curl up with my dog. Jeffrey never slights me on Valentine's Day, even though my birthday and Valentine's Day are 2 days apart. He still celebrates both of them individually, so I am grateful to him for that. Literally, right before I jumped on this call, those flowers in the back were dropped off here. Chocolate, he gifts around the house. So shout out to hubby for being amazing. But yeah, that's we're building an empire, so we love each other. We acknowledge each other. He's gonna work, and I'm gonna go home and wait for him to come home. That's it.
Gotcha. Hey, I completely understand that. When you're building an empire, that there are definitely times where you go through those seasons. So
That's
I
it.
completely get it.
And
Yeah.
the beautiful thing
Awesome.
is, I'll share this. I'm so blessed that my husband doesn't just show me love on February 14th. I often tell Jeffrey, if you don't give me anything for Valentine's Day, I will feel no type of way. Because literally, I've been with this man for 11 years. Jeffrey has given me a gift every month for the last 11 years. I get the date nights and all the sweet things. So kudos to everybody who has to wait for the one day for a display of affection. But Jeffrey gets a pass because I get it all the time. And I love it. Yep.
It's one of those things I think that when you're building something, I would say it's almost like what seems like a holiday or a major day for everybody else ends
Mhm.
up feeling like a work day for you when you're building something. Especially with you guys having the event space and the restaurant to where it's just like, you know, everybody that wants to go out to eat, they got to go somewhere. So
Right.
somebody's got to
Right.
be working.
That's it.
Mhm. Gotcha. Awesome.
And for
Well,
those
this
of
week,
you who are not in love, I'm taking divorce cases. Come on through. I'm sorry, Terrell. I'm sorry. I'm honest, but yeah, keep going. My bad. You didn't expect that one. I couldn't miss the moment. I couldn't. My bad.
But it is a timely moment. I will say, with from my accounting firm, we're working with a lot more lawyers. I did not realize that there were so many family law attorneys in the U.S.
It's big business, man, because I don't know. I've not looked at the statistic in years. They say 50% of all marriages fail. And beyond marriages, the child custody and those issues and the visitation, these rules are in place because somebody knew that when people don't like each other anymore, we're going to need the law to help figure this thing out, right? Because people can be so petty. So it's a major, I could do more of it. I'm not a fan of it. I'm good at it. I'm not a fan of it. But I especially this time of year, from after Christmas through April 15th through tax season, I get blown up for divorces. It's crazy.
I will say, from a financial standpoint, one of the things that I have seen is I've had some people reach out to me, although I don't do tax returns, as like, hey, if we get a divorce before the end of the year, can we still file and joint? Like, what does that do? And I think there are a lot of people who they're trying to time it, and I'm just like, wow.
It's real. We'll say that topic for another day. It's real.
So today, one of the things we wanted to go back to is, the 7 board responsibilities. And I will say is we posted it in the group. We listed all 7 of those responsibilities of a board of directors. So if you're a church organization and you are trying to get your affairs in order, you want a board in place, in the Facebook group, the Church Law and Finance Facebook group, we posted, here are the top 7 key responsibilities of a board. And today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into number 2, into the fiscal or the financial responsibility of the board. Now, first I want to start off because I sent you an email about and you and I have had conversations about this. When you talk to different churches about their board, do you get a sense that their board understands, like, financially, this is what you guys should probably be doing?
Mm-hmm. It's going to depend on the church, like everything else. I see some churches, they run like 50, they Fortune 500s, right? And I've seen some churches where we're just not familiar with this process, not because we're not capable. We've not been taught or made aware. So I see both ends of the spectrum, and it kind of just depends on where the church is and who the members of the church are and what y'all been exposed to. So I see both. Gotcha. But 9 times out of 10, like in the denominations, so I'll say this, a lot of times in the denominational churches, I'm talking about your United Methodist and your Baptist and your AME, there's a structure there because there are books of discipline. These denominations have been around for years. There are rules in place for you to follow. It's very easy to follow something that's already been set up and established. Where I see a lot of the issues are your non-denominational churches, where we're Bible-based and we're based on God, but we don't really have a lot of rules, and we're kind of making these things up as we go. So those would be the churches 9 times out of 10 where I see, hey, your board needs to be trained on how to do this, and you guys need to be made aware. So that's where I see the discrepancy in who does it well and who could use some help. That's what I see.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I would say the same. I do think that a lot of times when it comes down to, whether it's a church, whether it's a nonprofit, even in a for-profit, to where people don't really start because they don't really start an organization because they want to do the administrative stuff behind the scenes.
Right.
But as we've said every single week, if that stuff is not in order, it will stop you from having the impact in the community and carrying out the mission that you feel like you have been called to do. Is that if you don't have that stuff in order. And one of those areas that I've noticed when it comes down to a board of directors is I do think that there are some people who join a board and they don't know, what the board should be, responsible for from a financial standpoint. So I want to walk through a couple of things that and if you see me look off to the left, I'm looking because it's the list that I made. And I want to make sure I don't miss anything. And I think the first one I do think is that one of the areas I've seen for a lot of churches where it's just that sheer financial oversight, where the pastor is almost operating as if the church's bank account is the pastor's bank account. To where I think that is like the very first step one of like the board, you are responsible for having oversight, because there should be separation between the pastor's assets and the church's assets. Anything you want to say on that one?
I'm going to agree with you wholeheartedly. The church's bank account is not the pastor's personal bank account, even if the pastor set up the church. So if that's how the pastor or your church is operating, then that's a huge red flag for the IRS that could actually bring criminal sanctions and repercussions onto your ministry and onto your pastors and onto your board members. We'll get in that a little bit later. But you have to have some separation there. And I'm all for everybody getting their money, right? But the pastor needs to be on salary. And if there's a spending account that he gets monthly, that should be noted and dictated. There should be some checks and balances. The pastor should not have unfettered access to go to the church's operations account and get their money. It should be some folks there who have to authorize and sign off. And I hope I'm not going too far in the weeds, but it's an issue. It's a legal issue. It's a financial issue with the IRS, and it's a legal issue because you can go to jail for that.
No, absolutely. I agree. And I do think, from speaking of the IRS, whereas, from the IRS's perspective, a non-for-profit organization is not subject to paying, corporate taxes like a for-profit business is. And so from the IRS's perspective, they're like, we are giving you a special privilege because based on the paperwork you filled out, your church is a non-for-profit organization that is here to serve the community. But if we look and we see that financially, you're really kind of serving yourselves or you're serving a small group of people, it triggers a phenomenal issue that you do not want to deal with. I mean, because one of the things that I have seen is there are churches who are legitimately doing what they are supposed to do or what they laid out their mission is, and there are no, financial improprieties, but they are still being flagged for audits.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things that I tell people is that, your board providing kind of that oversight so that there is clear separation between financially what belongs to the pastor or to the leaders in the church, and then what belongs to the non-for-profit organization. So one of the key areas that I think that really plays a big role is when it comes down to budgeting. Now, from my experience, I've seen a lot of people struggle with this because I think a lot of people struggle with budgeting, period. Like even when you look at people in their own personal lives, I mean, the idea of having a budget becomes a struggle. And so one of the areas that I've seen a lot of boards not really get as engaged in is at the beginning of the year, or let's say, sometime in November, December, where you actually plan ahead to say, what is 2022 going to look like? Like, what are all the major expenses? What do we need to, get a heads up on? And when the board is not involved with, laying out that plan or even reviewing that plan, I think it just opens the door for more issues. Any context you want or things you want to add to the budgeting comment?
I think budgeting is vital. I say that strategic planning and budget is critical. And so if you have your board, that's what they should do. And for churches who may not be operating a budget, or we're operating off of tithes and offerings, so it's hard for us to set a budget because we don't know what our intake, our income is going to be. I always recommend look at your last 3 years of financial income and outgoing expenses at the church. Let's start with there as a litmus test. If we're bringing in $100,000 a year or $1 million a year, right? Where are we spending money? Right? Let's look at what did we do last year? What did that cost us? What are we trying to do this year? Are we trying to do the same thing? Are we trying to grow? What does that cost us? But you have to take the time as a board, as a church, as the leaders of your religious institution and get this money right. God requires us to be good stewards. So it's a disservice to your ministry, your members, and the community around, because you can't help them if you don't have any money to help them with, which Terrell said the IRS gives you a privilege of not taxing you. They don't let you keep that money so you can get a Bentley. They let you keep that money so you can put it back in the community. Now, get your Bentley, right? Just don't do it with the church's money, right? So we need to have budgets in place so that we can do these things. You know what I mean? And so a lot of churches, some don't have budgets, and that's scary. A lot of them do. And I always say, get with your department heads. What are you doing? Is each department trying to do, 3 things this year, whatever? What do we typically do? What does it cost? So we can know on the front end and allocate money accordingly. And I always like to have it done, Terrell. I like that for budgets to be done the fourth quarter of the previous year. So it can be laid out, so it can be discussed with boards to make it make sense, get it approved. Then when January 1 hits, we're ready to go and not trying to figure it out.
Absolutely. I mean, and a couple of, very practical things that I'll share with people, because I think you brought up a really good point of like some churches don't do it because they're like, we don't know what our tithes and offerings are going to look like. And so in situations like that, where if you don't have the history and you're concerned that, you're going to have a lot of fluctuation in the giving. And I think maybe one way to approach that is to start to look at what are the major areas that we are going to spend on, whether it's from, payroll, whether it's from doing, community service events, or it's doing different programs, is to look at your budget as a percentage of telling yourself like, hey, we are going to set a target that we can't spend more than 5% of our tithes and offering on this type of program, or we can't spend more than 10%. That way, as your giving fluctuates, you can kind of make some adjustments, because where I find that a lot of organizations run into problems is they take what I've seen as what I would call the government approach to budgeting, where they set a budget and they say, hey, here's the budget. Everybody goes and they spends, and no one takes time to see, okay, all right, how much have we actually collected? And can we even still afford to do that? Now, governments often can do it because they have the ability to print money and just issue bonds and stuff like that. But as a church, you do not have that ability to do that.
No, that's real.
You have to operate with what is actually coming in, like what you actually have access to. That's what you have to operate on. And I do think for churches that do have history, you may set a budget, is that part of the board responsibility is going back and looking and seeing, hey, if we budgeted to spend this much money because we expected that we were going to get this much in tithes and offering, is asking yourself, did you actually collect that much?
Right.
Because if you're not collecting what you thought you were going to, then you need to make some adjustments on your spending. And so I do think that is a phenomenal thing that helps. And then also, I think it also aids you in strategic planning, as far as if you look at the budget and say, hey, we're going to have this many events a year. Because one of the things that churches run into is where you got 5 different auxiliary groups that are trying to use the church sanctuary for something on the same day. Now you got, bad relationships because this group is mad at this group. And it's just like a lot of that could be resolved by just laying the plan out and looking ahead. Now, the other thing that I think is a very important one, and this one, sometimes it's worked into the budget, and then there are some things that happen outside, is when it comes down to major purchases. Now, depending on the size of your church, that will determine what's considered a major versus a minor purchase. But from my perspective, I think that the board should be involved in any major purchasing. Like if the church is going to go buy a new bus, depending on the size of your church, the board probably should weigh in on, is that a good idea or not? What have you seen in that area as far as the board being consulted on major purchases?
Yeah, I think that major purchases should come to the board for approval over a certain dollar amount. So depending on what your church budget is and how much money y'all can afford to be not wasteful with, but not such stringent, so stringent and rigid with, set a limit. Anything over $5,000 needs board approval, right? With an explanation, all right? So it's just like have those boundaries and those limits and those rules established, so you make sure that the decisions that are being made are in the best fiscal, financial, health interest of the church. So I'm all for board approval over a certain dollars amount. I got a day job in my company. We have a board. The CEO has authority to make financial decisions, anything $100,000 or less. anything over $100,000 needs board approval. So the budget threshold on how much we need board approval for is going to depend on where your church is financially. If y'all bringing in $100 million a year, then you might not need to talk less than $100,000, right? If you bringing in $100,000 a year, we might want board approval on anything over $500 because the church just can't afford to be wasteful. But you got to know your numbers to know what you can and can't do.
Yeah. And I think that is a tip for all ministers. If you are going to be a minister or a pastor on a staff, is you should ask, what is my authority? Like, what's my threshold for spending? Because you want to understand how much are you allowed to have discretion to spend on before you have to go get approval. Because something that we talked about, a couple of weeks ago, where we talked about apparent authority, whereas if a pastor goes and signs a contract, then the person or the company that he signed a contract with, they don't know whether that person has the authority or not. So it needs to be clear from internally and how you set up the policies. Is the board needs to be able to decide, like, hey, here's how much this pastor or this minister can actually go spend and commit the church to before they have to come back for an approval. And I think the same thing is on, now this is an area where I've seen some very ugly issues, is when it comes down to disbursements of assets. Like when the church owns something and the church is gonna either get rid of it or they're going to sell it off. So I'll start with the getting rid of it. Now, where I've seen this happen a lot is the church, they have these banquets and they have these very nice catering equipment. And then so-and-so said, ooh, that looks really nice. I'm having this, I would love to have something like that. And somebody who does not have authority says, oh yeah, you can have it. You can take it. And I've seen that turn into some issues because there was no clear responsibility about who can actually make that decision to give away what belongs to the church.
So
what have you seen?
Good question with legal implications, because if your church is a 501c3 nonprofit, there are rules on dissolution and distributing assets that were bought with nonprofit funds. They have to go to another nonprofit, right? And so it's like, who are you giving them to? So the person who wants the catering equipment, are you getting the catering equipment to feed people for free? Or is this your side business that now I don't have no overhead because I'm gonna use the church equipment till I get on, right? And so it's illegal, and you have to be mindful of that. Anything purchased with the church's resources, once again, here we go with a board approval on, we're gonna give this away or sell this. One person should not be making all the decisions. We say a lot about the pastor, but it shouldn't be. The pastor shouldn't solely make decisions. The head of the trustee board shouldn't solely make decisions. Your board chair shouldn't solely make decisions. All decisions for the church need to be made by a group, could be majority vote of your leadership. Leadership can be your board, whatever it needs to be. No one in the church should be making decisions as the business of the church by themselves. For the business of the church. If the pastor wants to preach about something the Lord told him to, cool, that's his thing. Let him and God, the Lord put him there to get vision. But when it comes to the business, he's not an island. He can't make those decisions by himself, and no one in the church should, even if it's giving something away or selling something. You have a board.
Absolutely. And I do think that there could be, churches don't always understand that there could be tax implications for things you give away to others. And even as you said, where the board decides, okay, are we giving this away? Are we selling this? Because I've seen some situations where the church had some, let's say, I think it was a specific situation was the church had some lawn care equipment, and the pastor decided to sell it to someone. It was like a riding lawnmower or something like that. And they sold it to them at a discount. And then it turned into a tax issue because it's just like, okay, all right, now is the church in the business of selling lawn equipment, or is the church in the business of a non-for-profit? Because selling lawn equipment is not part of your charter that you created, to where now you got a tax issue. And I think that there are different implications to the decisions that you make, both legally and financially, that for the protection of the pastor, the minister, the people working in the church, like, you don't want to create a financial issue So it's just like, bring it to the board and bring it to the people who have the responsibility for, asking certain questions. Because I do think, as the Bible talks about, there is safety in wise counsel, and your board is supposed to be there to provide that. And not only not to be, the boss of the pastor or the boss of the minister, but also to provide, protection and support, because there are things that the pastors, the ministers, the staff may not think about, or they may not have the time to look and investigate those things. But the members on the board may have access to resources, or they may have the skill themselves to provide kind of that oversight and that perspective that's needed, so that they help keep you out of trouble.
That's right.
Now, one of the areas that, and this one is, we've alluded to this before, but I wanted to call special attention to this, because this is an area that I have seen really, really, really go bad. This is the type of stuff that I've heard of stories of people going to jail over. I've heard of, churches, horrible experiences, is when it comes down to making financial commitments. Because when it comes down to deciding whether or not a church organization is going to take on a loan, or if they are going to be the guarantor for a loan that somebody else takes, like, there has to be approval on this. Because in the situation that I saw this, there was a church before that they took out a loan to do some renovations in the church. Well, at the same time, what they did is, the church already had a mortgage on it. So they took out a second loan, because the church owned two different properties. They took out a second loan on the property that was already paid off. And then they ended up defaulting on one of the loans, which ended up triggering a foreclosure on both properties because they were cross-collateralized. And the thing is, no one else in leadership knew except for the pastor. And what eventually happened is, when people started finding out, people left by, the hundreds, to where you went from one Sunday where you started having a full service, within a month, it was probably down to maybe like 50 people in the church. And it's just like, that could have been avoided.
I believe it. So the pastor was dead wrong, right? He was dead wrong. And let me not talk on it. He was just wrong. He should have got board approval, right? I understand the people leaving. So now, beyond financial mismanagement, I don't trust you. And I won't speak for white parishioners, but I'll speak for Black parishioners. It's hard out here to get this money and give it to the church in good faith. When you misuse the people's hard-earned money, they don't trust you. If I don't trust you here, if you can't live the Bible, I don't need you preaching it to me. Because see, this was no integrity. This is a whole bunch of problems. If you can't subject yourself to the leadership of a council or board, I don't even know if you're really hearing from God. I don't want no parts of it. Good luck to y'all. Right? I'm not going to stand by foolishness, because it could have been avoided. It should have never happened. And how many payments did we miss to have to actually get the default? So when you saw it going left, you didn't come back so we could kind of try to save this thing in the moment. Those are problems. And there are things that should never happen. And this is why you should not make unilateral decisions. Right? And then I wonder, all the things we talk about. Did the church have a budget? Did we know the financial health of the church? Right? Were we in a position to take this money out to make repairs? Sometimes things may have to wait, or we may have to trim some fat someplace else. You may not can do it all, but this is why you need a team making these decisions and not one person.
Absolutely. And I do think one of the opportunities for a board is, as a tip for pastors and for ministers, one of the benefits of having a board is that the board is invested in helping the church achieve its objective. So if you're looking at a situation, it's like, hey, we need to make this financial decision, and we don't have enough coming in from the tithes and the offering. That is a topic you bring to the board of saying, like, hey, what ideas do you board members have that we can get this up? Because we need to grow. We need to get access to funding so we can actually achieve the mission that we are after, to where the board is not there just to sit there to have a title and just to be able to say that, hey, I'm a board member.
Yes.
They are there to work as well as provide oversight. And I think that there are a lot of pastors who avoid bringing stuff to their board because they look at their board as, well, they're just my boss, or I don't want to have to answer to them. Part of it is like, you, as a board member, they also have a responsibility to support the mission of the church. So you can bring them homework, you can bring them tasks, like you can ask them to take action to help further the mission of the organization, but it doesn't happen if the conversations aren't happening.
Right. I totally agree. I sit on multiple boards, nonprofits, for-profits, churches, schools. I'm on one board that every board member has to commit to giving $7,000 to $10,000 a year to kind of help with, and it doesn't have to be, it can be your own money or money that you get from donations solicited in kind. It takes money to run businesses. So people on your board, it shouldn't just be a money pit, but it should be, like you said, a help, a resource, right? And if we know the needs, then we can come put our heads together, capital campaigns. There are other ways to get money. I want to talk about this on another show. Churches, especially your larger churches, the world is changing. You cannot just rely on tithes and offerings to run your ministry. Look at getting into your ministry into some businesses, own some properties, lease some stuff. You know what I'm saying? You need multiple sources of revenue. That's another case. But the people on your board should be resourceful, if not in their own money and their own connections, to help this church get the capital they need to do ministry. That's the goal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, one of the quick, I'll hit this one quick. I do think, we've talked a lot about, what should be done. And one of the things that I don't think people realize or grasp the magnitude of is when you are not exercising, sound fiscal responsibility, there are some risks. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to list them real quick, and maybe we can go into it on another one. But I do think you have the risk of there is financial liability, to where there are some cases where there are some situations I've seen where the IRS comes in and the IRS includes the board members as well as the pastors in an audit review. There's also the potential of, your professional reputation. Like if you have a professional designation, and let's say if there is a very negligent issue, the state board that is giving you a license may actually call your license in question if the issue is that bad. And then I think the most important one is that if there is no sound fiscal responsibility, the church is not going to be able to impact the community. And that is what you ultimately are there for. And if you can't do that because you don't have sound fiscal responsibility or you don't have sound processes and procedures in place, like, then the question I would ask is like, what are you guys doing? Like, you're there to impact the community. And if you're not able to do that, you really need to take a hard look and ask yourself, what are we doing? How do we fix this? Or do we even still need to exist? Maybe we just need to partner with someone else, because if you can't get that under control, you're not going to end up in a great place. So any final things you wanted to share, Harriet?
No, man, you hit the nail on the head. I just want to reiterate the community impact. The purpose of you being a nonprofit with the IRS is to help people. You doing it under the auspices of ministry and God and the Lord's work. You cannot be bringing in all this money, and if you are audited, the money does not help anybody. You cannot bring in $1 million in tithes and offerings and give away $5,000 for the year to the community. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't pass the smell test. That's what we say legally. So focus on why you really started this ministry and who are you helping, and make financial decisions that are in line with that.
Absolutely. Well, we'll post a recap of, like I said, the major things that we talked about in the group. So definitely go over to the Facebook group, Church Law and Finance. You can also find us on YouTube as well. So again, thank you guys so much. I mean, it is Valentine's Day, so enjoy your Valentine's Day, but we're running businesses, so we got work to do. Talk to you guys later.